Why didn't Jesus' mind shatter when it should have? 3 moments in history reveal a psychological resistance so extreme that modern science still can't fully explain it. While ordinary humans break under far less pressure, Jesus displayed a mental fortitude that defied every rule of human psychology. Today, we're diving into the hidden psychological mechanisms that kept his mind intact when everything around him collapsed. What you're about to discover will change how you understand the limits of human resilience forever. These aren't just religious stories. They're case studies in impossible mental strength. Most people think they understand what happened in the desert, but they're missing the psychological earthquake that should have destroyed Jesus' mind completely. Picture this: 40 days without food in one of the world's most brutal environments. The Judean wilderness isn't just hot. It's a psychological torture chamber where the human mind typically begins hallucinating after just 3 days of severe dehydration. Here's what mainstream history gets wrong. They focus on the spiritual temptations, but ignore the neurological catastrophe happening inside Jesus' brain. After week 1, his glucose-starved neurons should have been misfiring wildly. By week 2, his prefrontal cortex, the part that controls decision-making and identity, should have been offline. By week 3, complete psychological breakdown. Yet, historical accounts describe Jesus maintaining perfect mental clarity throughout. He engages in complex philosophical debates, demonstrates sharp reasoning, and shows zero signs of the confusion, paranoia, or identity dissolution that defines severe starvation. This isn't just impressive, it's medically impossible according to everything we know about brain function under extreme stress. Modern survival experts can't last more than 10 days in similar conditions while maintaining cognitive function. Navy SEALs, trained for impossible endurance, show severe mental degradation after just 5 days of food deprivation combined with environmental stress. Elite athletes, monks, and wilderness survival specialists all hit the same wall. The human brain simply cannot maintain higher-order thinking under such extreme physiological stress. But Jesus did something different, something that breaks every rule we know about human psychology and neuroscience. The question isn't what sustained his body, it's what preserved his mind when it should have completely collapsed. And the answer reveals a psychological mechanism so powerful, it challenges our understanding of human mental limits. The secret lies in what psychologists call transcendent identity anchoring, a mental framework so robust it can override the brain's survival panic systems. While most people's identity is tied to external circumstances, Jesus had developed what we might call an immovable psychological core that remained stable regardless of physical condition. Here's how it worked neurologically. When the average person faces extreme stress, their amygdala hijacks rational thinking, flooding the brain with cortisol and adrenaline. This triggers what psychologists call cognitive narrowing. The mind becomes fixated on immediate survival, abandoning complex thought processes. It's why people make terrible decisions under pressure and why torture is psychologically effective. But Jesus demonstrated something extraordinary: stress inoculation at a level that modern psychology is only beginning to understand. Through years of what we might call voluntary discomfort training, sleeping outdoors, fasting regularly, embracing social rejection, he had essentially rewired his brain's response to adversity. His neural pathways had been conditioned to remain calm under conditions that would panic most minds. The temptation accounts reveal this clearly. When offered food, power, and safety, Jesus doesn't respond with the desperate grabbing of a starving mind. Instead, he demonstrates the complex reasoning of someone whose identity isn't threatened by physical deprivation. This suggests his sense of self was anchored to something beyond physical circumstances, a psychological phenomenon that modern research shows is incredibly rare and powerful. Viktor Frankl observed similar patterns in concentration camp survivors who maintained mental clarity under unimaginable conditions. But even Frankl's strongest examples lasted months, not the sustained intensity that Jesus demonstrated. The 40-day period represents a psychological achievement that pushes the boundaries of documented human capability. Recent neuroscience research on extreme meditation practitioners shows that intensive mental training can literally rewire the brain's stress response systems. Tibetan monks who spend decades in meditation show altered brain activity that allows them to remain calm under conditions that would overwhelm typical nervous systems. Jesus appears to have achieved this same neurological transformation, but demonstrated it under far more extreme conditions. This wasn't superhuman. It was the result of a systematic approach to psychological resilience that few humans ever achieve. And this was just the beginning of his mental resistance training. Think of most people's minds like a house of cards in a windstorm. The moment serious pressure hits, everything collapses because each card depends on the others staying in place. But Jesus had built his psychological foundation like a deeply rooted oak tree. The stronger the storm, the deeper the roots seem to go. Here's the simple version. Jesus had trained his brain to separate his core identity from his physical circumstances. While most of us panic when we're uncomfortable, hungry, or threatened, his mind had learned to remain stable regardless of external conditions. It's like having a gyroscope inside your head that keeps you balanced no matter how much the world around you shakes. This psychological training created what researchers call stress inoculation. Just like how vaccines work by exposing you to small amounts of a virus so your immune system gets stronger, Jesus had systematically exposed his mind to progressively greater challenges until it became virtually unshakable. The 40-day fast wasn't a test he passed by accident. It was the culmination of years of mental conditioning. Every time he chose discomfort over ease, rejection over approval, or principle over convenience, he was strengthening his psychological immune system. By the time he reached the desert, his mind had become so resilient that even extreme physical stress couldn't destabilize his sense of self. But this was just the warm-up. The real test of his psychological resistance was still coming, and it would involve something far more devastating than physical deprivation: the complete betrayal of trust by someone he considered family. Most minds that survive physical torture completely shatter when faced with emotional betrayal. But Jesus was about to demonstrate that his mental fortitude went even deeper than anyone imagined. If this is exploding your head, leave your like so more people can discover these hidden truths. But wait, because the second case is even more shocking. Everyone knows Judas betrayed Jesus, but what they don't understand is the psychological devastation this should have caused, and why Jesus' mind didn't break when faced with the ultimate human nightmare: betrayal by chosen family. Betrayal trauma is one of the most psychologically destructive experiences humans can endure. When someone we deeply trust violates that trust, it doesn't just hurt our feelings, it shatters our fundamental ability to make sense of reality. Psychologists have documented that betrayal by intimate partners causes PTSD symptoms more severe than many combat veterans experience. But this wasn't just any betrayal. Jesus had handpicked Judas, spent 3 years in daily contact with him, shared meals, trusted him with their group's finances, and considered him family. The historical accounts suggest Jesus even knew the betrayal was coming. Imagine knowing that someone you love is actively planning to destroy you, and having to continue acting normally around them every single day. Here's what makes this psychologically impossible. Jesus continued functioning at peak mental performance throughout this period. He taught complex parables, engaged in sophisticated theological debates, and made strategic decisions about his mission, all while experiencing what should have been paralyzing emotional trauma. Modern psychology shows that betrayal trauma typically causes severe cognitive disruption. Victims experience intrusive thoughts, hypervigilance, emotional numbing, and difficulty concentrating. Their worldview fractures because if they can't trust their own judgment about the people closest to them, how can they trust anything? Most people take years to recover from major betrayal, and many never fully do. Yet Jesus demonstrated zero signs of the psychological disintegration that betrayal normally causes. During the Last Supper, knowing Judas would betray him within hours, Jesus remained emotionally stable enough to provide comfort and guidance to his other disciples. This level of emotional regulation under extreme interpersonal stress represents a psychological achievement that challenges our understanding of human emotional limits. The question isn't how he forgave Judas. It's how his mind remained functional when it should have been consumed by the cognitive chaos that betrayal typically unleashes. The answer reveals a psychological defense mechanism so sophisticated that modern therapy is only beginning to understand it. Radical emotional compartmentalization, combined with what psychologists call secure internal attachment. Most people's emotional stability depends on external validation and trust from others. When that trust is violated, their entire emotional foundation collapses. But Jesus had developed what researchers now recognize as the strongest possible form of psychological security, an internal sense of worth and identity that couldn't be shaken by external betrayal. Here's the neurological breakthrough. Jesus had essentially rewired his brain's attachment systems. Instead of depending on human relationships for emotional security, he had developed what psychologists call earned secure attachment, the ability to self-regulate emotions and maintain stable self-worth regardless of how others treat you. This is incredibly rare. Most humans never develop true emotional independence because our brains are wired for social connection from birth. We're literally designed to need approval and validation from others for psychological stability. Breaking free from this evolutionary programming requires years of intense psychological work that few people ever complete. The betrayal account showed Jesus displaying textbook characteristics of someone with unshakable internal security. When Judas approaches with the soldiers, Jesus doesn't react with anger, desperation, or emotional collapse. Instead, he demonstrates what psychologists call radical acceptance, acknowledging the reality of the situation without being emotionally destabilized by it. Recent research on individuals who maintain emotional stability under extreme interpersonal stress shows specific brain activity patterns. Their prefrontal cortex remains active and connected to emotional processing centers, allowing them to experience painful emotions without being overwhelmed by them. This prevents the emotional hijacking that typically occurs during betrayal, trauma. But Jesus took this even further. Historical accounts suggest he continued to show compassion toward Judas even during the betrayal itself. This indicates not just emotional stability, but the ability to maintain empathy under conditions that would trigger pure survival mode in most minds. It's a level of emotional sophistication that represents the absolute peak of human psychological development. Modern trauma therapists spend years helping clients develop even basic emotional regulation skills. Jesus demonstrated mastery that exceeded what most people achieve after decades of therapy, and he maintained it under conditions that would break even highly trained mental health professionals. This psychological resilience was about to face its ultimate test in a scenario that combines the worst aspects of physical torture, social humiliation, and existential terror. Imagine your emotional stability as a smartphone that gets its power from being plugged into other people. When someone you trust betrays you, it's like they suddenly rip the charging cable out while your battery is at 10%. Most people's emotional systems immediately go into panic mode and shut down. But Jesus had developed what we might call an internal nuclear reactor. His emotional stability wasn't dependent on being plugged in to other people's approval or trustworthiness. He had learned to generate his own emotional energy from the inside, making him psychologically self-sufficient in a way that most humans never achieve. Here's the simple version. Jesus had trained his mind to separate other people's actions from his own sense of worth and security. When Judas betrayed him, it was painful, but it didn't threaten his core identity or emotional stability. It's like having emotional armor that protects your heart while still allowing you to feel and care about others. This internal security system allowed him to respond to betrayal with compassion instead of rage and clarity instead of confusion. While most betrayed people become consumed with questions like, "How could they do this to me?" or "What did I do wrong?" Jesus' mind remained focused on his larger purpose and mission. The psychological training that created this emotional independence took years to develop. Every time he chose forgiveness over resentment, service over self-protection, or love over fear, he was strengthening his internal emotional foundation. By the time Judas betrayed him, his psychological core had become so stable that even ultimate betrayal couldn't shake it. But this emotional resilience was about to face a test that would push it beyond anything the human mind has ever been asked to endure. Physical torture combined with social humiliation and the terror of impending death. A psychological perfect storm designed to completely annihilate human dignity and mental coherence. And subscribe now, because the third case that comes next will completely change your perspective on human nature. The crucifixion represents the most psychologically devastating scenario humans have ever devised. A combination of extreme physical torture, complete social humiliation, and slow public death, designed specifically to break the victim's mind before destroying their body. But here's what most people miss about crucifixion. It wasn't just an execution method, it was psychological warfare. The Romans perfected it as the ultimate tool for destroying human dignity and mental resistance. Victims typically experienced complete psychological breakdown long before physical death, often begging for mercy, cursing their enemies, or descending into incoherent madness. The process was engineered to systematically dismantle every aspect of human psychological defense. First, public stripping removes personal dignity. Then, the physical pain becomes so overwhelming that higher brain functions shut down. The slow suffocation forces victims into panic cycles that exhaust mental resources. Finally, the public humiliation while dying naked and helpless was designed to crush any remaining sense of self-worth. Historical records show that crucifixion victims typically lost their sanity within hours. They would scream, beg, curse, bargain, or withdraw into catatonic states. The psychological torture was often more devastating than the physical pain. Strong men, trained warriors, and political leaders all followed the same pattern: complete mental collapse under conditions specifically designed to break human psychology. Yet Jesus demonstrated something that shouldn't be possible. Instead of psychological disintegration, historical accounts describe him maintaining mental clarity throughout the entire ordeal. He spoke coherently, showed concern for others, and even demonstrated what appears to be active problem-solving when he arranged care for his mother. This isn't just unusual, it's unprecedented in documented history. No other crucifixion victim maintained higher-order thinking under these conditions. While experiencing the most psychologically devastating torture humans have created, Jesus displayed cognitive function that would be impressive under normal circumstances. The question that breaks every rule of psychology: how did his mind not only survive, but continue functioning at a level that allowed him to comfort others, think strategically, and maintain his core identity while enduring psychological torture specifically designed to annihilate human consciousness? The answer reveals the ultimate expression of psychological transcendence. Jesus had achieved what modern psychology calls post-traumatic growth before the trauma even occurred. His mind had been trained to find meaning and purpose even in ultimate suffering, creating a psychological framework so robust it could transform the worst human experience into something that strengthened rather than broke his sense of self. Here's the breakthrough insight. While most minds collapse under extreme suffering because they can't make sense of meaningless pain, Jesus had developed what psychologists call ultimate meaning-making capacity. His identity was so deeply rooted in purpose that even unjust suffering couldn't shake his fundamental sense of who he was and why he existed. Viktor Frankl discovered this principle in concentration camps. Those who maintained a sense of meaning and purpose were more likely to survive psychological breakdown. But Jesus had taken this concept to its absolute limit. He hadn't just found meaning despite suffering. He had transformed suffering itself into a meaningful expression of his deepest values. The crucifixion accounts reveal sophisticated psychological processes happening in real time. When Jesus says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," he's demonstrating what psychologists call cognitive reframing under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Instead of viewing his torturers as enemies to hate, he reframes them as confused people deserving compassion. This requires extraordinary prefrontal cortex function under conditions that typically shut down higher brain activity completely. Recent neuroscience research shows that intense physical pain floods the brain with stress hormones that make complex thinking nearly impossible. Yet Jesus maintained the emotional and cognitive sophistication necessary for forgiveness while experiencing maximum physical and psychological torture. Even more remarkably, he continued caring for others while dying. Arranging his mother's care and comforting the thief beside him shows that his empathy systems remained not just functional, but actively engaged. This suggests a level of psychological integration that allowed him to transcend self-preservation instincts that normally override all other concerns under extreme threat. Modern psychology recognizes this as the highest possible form of human development. The ability to maintain your core values and care for others even when your own survival is threatened. It represents a psychological achievement that pushes the absolute boundaries of documented human capability. The three moments together reveal a pattern. Jesus had systematically trained his mind to remain stable, compassionate, and purposeful under progressively more extreme conditions, culminating in a psychological performance that redefined the limits of human mental resilience. Think of most people's minds during extreme crisis like a computer experiencing a massive system overload. When too much stress hits the processor, everything starts shutting down to protect the core system. Non-essential programs stop running, complex thinking becomes impossible, and eventually the whole system crashes or goes into safe mode. But Jesus had essentially rebuilt his mental operating system with an unbreakable core program. No matter how much external pressure hit his psychological processor, his fundamental identity and values kept running smoothly. It's like having a computer that not only doesn't crash under extreme load, but actually runs better and helps other systems around it stay stable too. Here's the simple version. Jesus had trained his mind to find strength and purpose in the worst possible circumstances. While most people's sense of meaning depends on things going well, his psychological foundation was built on something much deeper, a core identity that could transform even ultimate suffering into meaningful action. This mental framework allowed him to respond to the worst human experience with the best human qualities: forgiveness, love, and concern for others. Instead of being consumed by his own pain, he used it as an opportunity to demonstrate the values he had spent his life developing. The three cases together show a pattern of progressive psychological conditioning. The desert trained his mind to remain stable without physical comfort. The betrayal trained his emotions to stay secure without external validation. The crucifixion proved that his identity could remain intact and purposeful even when everything else was being stripped away. This wasn't superhuman. It was the result of the most sophisticated psychological training program ever documented. Jesus had systematically prepared his mind for the ultimate test of human resilience, and when that test came, his psychological foundation proved unbreakable. He had solved the ultimate puzzle of human psychology: how to maintain your humanity under conditions designed to destroy it. These 3 moments reveal an impossible psychological achievement: a human mind that became stronger under conditions designed to break it completely. The desert, the betrayal, and the crucifixion weren't just tests Jesus passed. They were a masterclass in ultimate human resilience that modern psychology is still trying to understand. If these 3 cases exploded your mind, smash that like button and subscribe to not miss our next mysteries. And tell us in the comments, which of these revelations surprised you most? Hit the bell so the algorithm doesn't lie to you. And if you know someone who needs to see this, share it, because these truths need to be known. Until next time, keep questioning everything. This content presents speculative psychological analysis based on publicly available historical records, not clinical diagnosis. The interpretations offered represent one analytical perspective and should not substitute formal religious or historical education.